The unwanted bride, Carolyn Matthews, stood before the full-length mirror in the bridal suite of St. Thomas Cathedral, reflection showing a woman she barely recognized. The ivory Virawang gown hugged her figure perfectly, its delicate lace overlay catching the afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows. Her auburn hair was swept into an elaborate updo, decorated with tiny pearls that matched her mother's vintage necklace. She looked every bit the perfect bride, except she wanted to run. Her hands trembled as they gripped the bouquet of white peonies and garden roses. The sweet fragrance that should have brought her joy instead made her stomach turn. Outside the door, she could hear the string quartet beginning their processional music, the haunting melody of Pachelbel's canon drifting through the corridor like a funeral march. "You look absolutely radiant, darling." Her mother, Patricia Matthews, appeared behind her, adjusting the cathedral veil with practiced precision. Her smile was bright, but Caroline could see the steel underneath. This wedding was everything her mother had worked toward for 26 years. "Can't do this!" "Mom?" Caroline's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Patricia's hands stilled on the veil, her eyes meeting Caroline's in the mirror. For just a moment, something like sympathy flickered across her perfectly composed features. Then it vanished, replaced by the iron determination that had built the Matthews pharmaceutical empire alongside Caroline's father. "Of course you can. You're a Matthews. We don't run from our responsibilities." Her mother's tone was gentle but unyielding. "The Ashfords are one of the most respected families in New York. This merger will secure both companies for generations. Not a business transaction." The words burst out before Carolyn could stop them. "No, you're my daughter, and I'm asking you to do what's best for this family." Patricia turned Carolyn to face her, hands firm on her shoulders. "Robert, your father worked himself into an early grave building this company. Don't let his sacrifice be for nothing." The guilt hit Carolyn like a physical blow. Her father had died 3 years ago from a heart attack at his desk, leaving behind a company on the verge of collapse and a daughter who had been studying art history in Paris. She had come home to help save the family legacy, never imagining it would cost her everything she dreamed of becoming. A soft knock interrupted them. "It's time," announced the wedding coordinator, a cheerful woman whose enthusiasm felt obscene. The stranger at the altar of the cathedral was packed with 500 guests, all of New York's elite society, dressed in their finest. Caroline recognized business partners, socialites, politicians, and celebrities as she walked down the endless aisle on her uncle's arm. Her father's absence felt like a gaping wound. At the altar stood Dominic Ashford, and even through her resentment, Caroline had to admit he was devastatingly handsome. At 32, he had the kind of dark, brooding looks that graced magazine covers. His charcoal Armani suit fit him perfectly, accentuating broad shoulders and a lean, athletic build. His black hair was styled with casual elegance, and his dark brown eyes watched her approach with an unreadable expression. They had met only 3 times before today. Once at the engagement announcement, once at a charity gala where they had barely spoken, and once at a strained dinner with both families where lawyers discussed prenuptial agreements while they sat in awkward silence. Caroline knew the facts about him from internet searches and family gossip. Harvard Business School graduate, CEO of Ashford Technologies at 28, dated models and actresses but never seriously. Obsessively private despite his public profile, but she didn't know him. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. The ceremony began with traditional vows that felt anything but sacred. The priest spoke of love and commitment, of 2 souls becoming one. Carolyn heard only the hollowness of each phrase. When it came time for her vows, she had to force the words past the lump in her throat. "I, Caroline Elizabeth Matthews, take you, Dominic James Ashford, to be my lawfully wedded husband." The words tasted like ashes. She didn't dare look at Dominic as she spoke them, focusing instead on the elaborate flower arrangements behind him. White lilies and roses, symbolizing purity and love. Such beautiful lies. When Dominic spoke his vows, his voice was steady and clear, revealing nothing of what he might be feeling. "If he felt anything at all, you may now kiss the bride." This was the moment Carolyn had been dreading. Dominic stepped closer, his hand lifting to carefully draw back her veil. His fingers were warm against her cheek, surprisingly gentle. For the first time, their eyes met directly, and Caroline saw something flash in those dark depths. Resignation? Regret? She couldn't tell. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. But there was nowhere to run, not with 500 people watching. When his lips touched hers, it was brief and chaste, the kiss of strangers fulfilling an obligation. Yet even that simple contact sent an unexpected jolt through her body. A spark she immediately tried to extinguish. This was not a fairy tale. This was a prison sentence. The cold reception, the reception at the Plaza Hotel, was everything money could buy. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables draped in silk and silver. A 12-piece orchestra played jazz standards, while white-gloved waiters served champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The wedding cake was a 6-tier masterpiece of buttercream and fondant. Topped with sugar flowers so realistic they looked freshly picked, Caroline smiled until her face hurt, danced with Dominic for the cameras with mechanical precision, and cut the elaborate cake she had no desire to taste. Through it all, Dominic remained at her side, attentive in a way that felt more like surveillance than affection. His hand on the small of her back was warm but impersonal. When required to speak, his words were polite and proper and completely devoid of genuine emotion. She caught him watching her several times throughout the evening, his expression unreadable. Once, when their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, something in his gaze made her breath catch. But then someone called his name, and the moment passed, leaving her wondering if she had imagined it. "They make such a stunning couple," she heard someone say as she passed. "Like they stepped out of a magazine. If only they knew the truth, that this stunning couple were essentially strangers, bound together by corporate contracts and family pressure. That beneath the designer clothes and practiced smiles, they were both trapped in a gilded cage as the evening wore on." Carolyn found herself watching Dominic when he wasn't looking. She noticed things she hadn't before. The way he loosened his tie slightly when he thought no one was watching, as if it was choking him. The tension in his jaw when his father clapped him on the shoulder and said something that made several nearby businessmen laugh. The way his eyes would occasionally drift to the windows, as if he too was contemplating escape. Maybe they weren't so different after all. Maybe he was just as much a prisoner as she was. Departure to paradise as the reception ended. Rose petals were thrown into the humid June night air as Caroline and Dominic made their way to the waiting limousine. Inside, away from the cameras and crowds, the silence was deafening. They sat on opposite ends of the leather seat, careful not to touch, as the car wound through Manhattan streets toward their hotel. "We leave for Greece tomorrow afternoon," Dominic said finally, his voice neutral. "The jet is scheduled for 3. "Fine." Carolyn kept her eyes on the passing city lights, anywhere but on him. "Carolyn." He waited until she reluctantly turned to face him. "I know this isn't what either of us wanted, but we're in this now. We might as well try to make it bearable." "Bearable," she laughed, a bitter sound. "That's a low bar for a marriage. What would you prefer? That I lie and pretend this is some grand romance?" His tone sharpened slightly. "We're both adults. We both know why this happened. Our families needed this alliance and we were convenient pawns. At least you're honest about it." Carolyn turned back to the window, blinking back tears she refused to let him see. How refreshing. They didn't speak again for the rest of the drive. At the hotel, a suite had been reserved, the honeymoon suite, naturally. But Dominic immediately grabbed extra pillows from the closet and made himself a makeshift bed on the sofa. Caroline watched this with a mixture of relief and something she refused to examine too closely. Disappointment. That was absurd. "Thank you," she said quietly, surprising herself. Dominic paused in arranging the pillows, looking at her with those unreadable dark eyes. "For what?" "For not assuming anything? For giving me space?" Something in his expression softened slightly. "I'm not a monster, Carolyn. Despite what you might think of me right now, I don't think you're a monster." She surprised herself again with the honesty. "I just don't know what I think of you at all. The feeling is mutual." but there was something almost like warmth in his tone now. Maybe that's something we can work on. In Greece. Santorini, their honeymoon destination chosen by their mothers. Romantic paradise where they were supposed to fall in love. Or at least pretend to for the photographers their families would inevitably send, as Caroline lay alone in the massive bed that night. Still wearing her wedding dress because she couldn't face undressing, she thought about Dominic on the uncomfortable sofa in the next room. Her husband, the stranger she had promised to spend her life with. She had sworn she would hate him forever, that she would never forgive him for being part of this arrangement. But something about the careful way he had lifted her veil, the gentle pressure of his hand on her back, the respect he showed by giving her space, all of it complicated her neat narrative of victimhood and villained. Maybe, just maybe, they were both victims in this. Tomorrow, they would fly to Greece. 2 whitewashed buildings and impossibly blue waters. To a place where, perhaps, away from family expectations and business obligations, they could figure out who they really were to each other. Caroline closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking her. In the darkness, she could still feel the ghost of that brief kiss at the altar, the unexpected warmth that had sparked between them. No, she wouldn't let herself hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope would only lead to more pain, but as sleep claimed her, a small, traitorous part of her heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, this disaster of a marriage might become something more. Arrival in paradise. Private jet touched down on Santorini. Just as the sun began its descent toward the Aegean Sea, Caroline pressed her face against the window, breath catching despite herself. The island rose from the impossibly blue water like something from a dream. White buildings with their distinctive blue domes clung to volcanic cliffs, creating a stunning contrast against the deep azure sky. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Forgetting for a moment that she was supposed to maintain her cold distance, Dominic leaned across to look out her window, and she caught the scent of his cologne. Sandalwood and something crisp, like ocean air. "I've been here before," he said quietly, "but somehow it looks different now." Their eyes met, held for a moment too long. Caroline looked away first, her heart doing an uncomfortable flip. The villa their families had rented was perched on the caldera edge in Oia, the most picturesque village on the island. It was a traditional Cycladic house that had been renovated into luxurious accommodations. Whitewashed walls curved organically, creating intimate spaces that flowed into each other. Blue shutters framed windows that offered breathtaking views of the sea and neighboring islands. A private infinity pool seemed to pour directly into the Aegean, and the terrace was furnished with comfortable loungers and a dining area shaded by a pergola covered in flowering vines. 2 bedrooms, the property manager announced cheerfully as she showed them around, seemingly oblivious to the tension between them. Each with their own bathroom and sea view. Very private, very romantic. After she left, Caroline and Dominic stood awkwardly in the main living area, surrounded by their luggage. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I'll take the smaller room," Dominic offered, already reaching for his bags. "Wait," Caroline surprised herself by speaking. "This is ridiculous. We're both miserable, we're both exhausted, and we're stuck here for 2 weeks. Can we at least try to be civil? Maybe even friendly?" Dominic studied her face, as if trying to determine whether she was sincere. Finally, he set down his bags and extended his hand. "Truce." Caroline looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. In the golden afternoon light streaming through the windows, she could see details she had missed before, faint lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than she had witnessed. A small scar on his chin, the way his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm. Truce. The first crack over the next few days, they established a careful routine. Mornings were spent separately. Caroline would wake early and sit on the terrace with coffee, sketching in the notebook she had packed at the last minute. Dominic would go for long runs along the cliff paths, returning sweaty and slightly more relaxed than when he left. Afternoons they spent exploring the island together, maintaining a polite distance but slowly, incrementally, beginning to talk. Not about their families or the marriage, or anything substantial. Safe topics only. Books they had read, places they had traveled, favorite foods. I wanted to be an architect, Dominic admitted one afternoon as they wandered through the narrow streets of Oia. When I was a kid, I used to build elaborate structures with whatever I could find. Blocks, cards, sticks. My father said it was a waste of time. Carolyn glanced at him, surprised by this glimpse of vulnerability. I wanted to be a painter. A real one, not just someone who dabbled. I was accepted to art school in Florence. No, she paused. My mother said it wasn't a practical career, so we both gave up our dreams. His voice was flat. Resigned seems to be our specialty. They walked in silence for a while, the weight of their shared disappointments hanging between them. The streets were alive with tourists and locals, laughter spilling from tavernas, the smell of grilled octopus and fresh bread filling the air. Life continuing its joyful chaos all around them, while they existed in their bubble of polite misery. That evening, as the sun began its spectacular descent, Carolyn found herself on the terrace with her sketchbook. She had been trying to capture the play of light on the water, the way the white buildings seemed to glow as if lit from within. But her mind kept wandering to the man in the other room, to the revelations of the afternoon, to the growing sense that maybe she had been wrong about him. "May I join you?" Dominic's voice startled her. She looked up to find him holding 2 glasses of wine, his expression uncertain. He had changed into casual linen pants and a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were more muscular than his suit suggested. His hair was slightly damp from a shower. "Sure." She closed her sketchbook, suddenly self-conscious. He handed her a glass and settled into the chair beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange, pink and purple that seemed impossible, too beautiful to be real. "My father had a heart attack when I was 24, Dominic said suddenly. Survived it, but it scared him. He became obsessed with legacy, with making sure the company would continue. That's when he started pressuring me about marriage, about producing heirs. He took a long drink of wine. I resisted for years. Dated casually, never let anyone get too close. But then he had another scare last year, and my mother begged me to give him peace of mind." Carolyn felt something shift in her chest. "So you agreed to marry a stranger?" "I agreed to marry someone suitable. Someone who understood what this life required." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes were impossibly dark. "But you're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Someone cold. Ambitious. Someone who saw this as a business arrangement and nothing more." He paused. "Instead, I got someone who sketches sunsets and wanted to paint in Florence. Someone whose eyes show every emotion she's feeling, even when she's trying to hide them." Caroline's breath caught. No one had ever described her that way. Her mother always criticized her for being too emotional, too impractical, too soft for the business world. "You're not what I expected either," she admitted. "I thought you'd be arrogant, entitled, another rich man who saw me as a possession, and now I think you might be just as trapped as I am." The gift the next morning. Caroline woke to find a note slipped under her door. "Meet me in the village square at 10. Wear comfortable shoes." Trust me, she almost didn't go. This was getting dangerous, this tentative friendship they were building. It would be easier to maintain her resentment, to keep him at arm's length. But curiosity won out. Dominic was waiting by the central fountain, looking unfairly attractive in jeans and a navy t-shirt. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that transformed him completely. Caroline felt her traitorous heart skip. "Come on," he said, taking her hand without thinking. Then, seeming to realize what he had done, he started to pull back. But Caroline, surprising herself, held on. He led her through winding streets, past tourist shops and local bakeries, until they reached a small storefront with a hand-painted sign. "Demetris Art Supplies" in both Greek and English. "I called ahead," Dominic explained. "They're expecting us." Inside, the shop was a treasure trove. Canvas and paper in every size, paints and colors Caroline had dreamed about. Brushes of all varieties, easels and palettes, and everything an artist could want. The owner, an elderly man with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers, greeted them warmly. "For you," Dominic said simply. "Get whatever you want." "Everything you want." Caroline stared at him, tears suddenly stinging her eyes. "Why would you do this? Because you gave up Florence? Because your eyes light up when you talk about painting? Because," he trailed off, looking uncertain, "because I want to see you happy. Is that so strange? It should have been. They barely knew each other. This marriage was a business arrangement. But standing in that small shop, surrounded by the tools of the art she loved, with this man who was supposed to be her enemy, watching her with such gentle hope in his eyes, it didn't feel strange at all. It felt like the first real moment of her life. Caroline spent an hour selecting supplies, Dominic patiently carrying her choices and offering opinions when asked. She chose a medium-sized canvas, acrylic paints in a rainbow of colors, and brushes that felt perfect in her hand. The owner threw in a portable easel as a wedding gift, refusing payment with a knowing smile. Back at the villa, Caroline set up on the terrace. The view was too perfect not to paint. But as she mixed colors and made her first tentative strokes, she found herself painting not the landscape, but something more abstract. Blues and grays swirling together, creating something new. Separate elements combining into unexpected beauty. Dominic watched from the doorway, unaware she could see his reflection in the glass doors. The expression on his face was unguarded, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. He looked like a man discovering something precious, something he hadn't known he was looking for. They almost kissed that night. They cooked dinner together in the villa's small kitchen. Or rather, they attempted to cook dinner, which resulted in a minor disaster involving burned lamb and smoke alarms. They ended up laughing, really laughing. As they scraped the charred remains into the trash and ordered from a local taverna instead, "I'm a terrible cook," Caroline admitted, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "I'm worse," Dominic countered. "In college, I once started a small fire trying to make toast." "How do you burn toast?" Very carefully, and with great determination, they ate their delivered meal on the terrace, under a sky full of stars. The moon was rising over the water, painting a silver path across the dark surface. Wine flowed freely, loosening tongues and lowering guards. "Tell me something true," Caroline said, the wine making her brave. "Something you've never told anyone?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on his glass. "I'm scared," he finally said. "All the time. Scared I'll fail. Scared I'll disappoint everyone. Scared I'll wake up one day and realize I've lived someone else's life instead of my own." The raw honesty in his voice made Caroline's chest ache. "I'm angry," she confessed. "At my mother, at myself, at the world. I'm so angry that I gave up everything I wanted to be the daughter everyone expected. And I'm terrified that anger is all I'll ever be." "You're not just anger." Dominic leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Your passion and creativity and fire. Your sunset paintings and terrible cooking and laughter that sounds like music. You're so much more than you think you are." Caroline's breath caught. They were close now, so close she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. The air between them felt electric, charged with possibility. "Dominic," she whispered, not sure if it was a warning or an invitation. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, and she found herself leaning into the touch. "I want to kiss you," he said, his voice rough. "But not because we're supposed to. Not because anyone expects it. Only if you want it to." Caroline's heart was racing. This was dangerous. This was real. This could break her in ways the forced marriage never could. But looking into his eyes, seeing her own fear and hope reflected back, she realized she was already broken. They both were. Maybe they could put each other back together. "Yes," she breathed. "I want it too." Dominic's hand slid to cup the back of her neck, his thumb tracing her jawline. He leaned in slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, giving her 1,000 opportunities to change her mind. When their lips finally met, It was nothing like the chaste kiss at their wedding. This was fire and need, and the desperate relief of two lonely souls finally finding connection. His mouth moved over hers with a hunger that matched her own, and Carolyn heard herself make a small sound of pleasure that seemed to undo something in him. His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. Caroline's fingers tangled in his hair. She tasted wine and promise and the terrifying possibility of hope. But then Dominic's phone rang, shrill and insistent, shattering the moment. They broke apart, both breathing hard, staring at each other with a mixture of desire and shock. I should. Dominic gestured vaguely at the phone. Double quotes, yes, of course. Caroline stood quickly, her chair scraping against the stone. I should go to bed. It's late. She fled to her room before he could respond, her heart pounding, her lips still tingling from his kiss. Behind her closed door, she pressed her fingers to her mouth, trying to process what had just happened. She had kissed her husband. Really kissed him. And she had wanted it. Wanted him. Everything was different now. Everything had changed. In the morning, they would have to face this new reality. But for tonight, Caroline allowed herself to curl up in bed and remember the feel of his hands on her skin, the taste of his kiss, the possibility that maybe this prison could become something like home. The night everything changed. Caroline couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, replaying the kiss over and over in her mind. Finally, around 2 a.m, she gave up and wandered out to the terrace. Thinking Dominic would be asleep, he wasn't. He stood at the railing, shirtless, looking out at the moonlit sea. The silver light painted his skin in shades of shadow and luminescence, highlighting the muscles of his back and shoulders. He turned when he heard her, and the expression on his face stole her breath. Raw need mixed with tender uncertainty. Can't sleep either? His voice was rough, intimate in the darkness. Too much on my mind. Caroline moved to stand beside him, hyper-aware of every inch of space between them. She wore only a thin silk nightgown, and the night air made her shiver. Cold? Before she could answer, Dominic draped his discarded shirt around her shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled like him. The gesture was so gentle, so caring, that something inside Caroline finally cracked wide open. I don't want to go back, she whispered. To New York? To our families? To pretending this isn't real? Dominic turned to face her fully, his hands finding her waist like they belonged there. Then let's not pretend. Let's make this real. Let's choose this. Choose each other. Not because anyone forced us, but because we want to. What if it doesn't work? What if we get home and everything falls apart? Then we fall apart together. His thumb traced circles on her hip, through the thin silk. Caroline, I know this started wrong. I know we were both victims of our family's ambitions. But somewhere between the cathedral and this terrace, something changed for me. You changed everything. Tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks. I was supposed to hate you. I know. He wiped her tears away with infinite tenderness. Do you hate me? No. The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. I think I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me. Dominic's breath caught. Say that again? I'm falling in love with you. Saying it a second time made it more real, more true. I don't know how it happened or when, but it did. And I'm so scared, don't be scared. He pulled her against him, one hand cradling her head, the other wrapped around her waist. I'm falling in love with you too. Maybe I started falling that first day, when I lifted your veil and saw all that fire in your eyes. Maybe it was when you laughed at our cooking disaster. Maybe it's been happening all along, and I was too stubborn to admit it. Caroline pulled back just enough to see his face. This is crazy. We barely know each other. Then let's spend the rest of our lives getting to know each other. He cupped her face in his hands. Caroline, I know this isn't how love stories are supposed to start, but maybe we can write our own ending. One where we choose each other every day, not because we have to, but because we can't imagine not choosing each other. She rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. All her fear and hope and desperate love. Dominic responded with equal fervor, his arms tightening around her as if he would never let go. This time, when the kiss deepened, there was no phone to interrupt. No hesitation. Just two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way, finally giving in to what had been building between them since that first charged moment at the altar. Dominic lifted her in one smooth motion, and Caroline wrapped her legs around his waist, never breaking the kiss. He carried her inside, navigating by moonlight, until they reached his bedroom. He laid her on the bed with reverence, like she was something precious. "Are you sure?" he asked, even as his hands trembled with restraint. "I've never been more sure of anything." She pulled him down to her. What followed was tender and passionate, awkward and perfect. They learned each other's bodies with careful exploration, whispered confessions between kisses, laughter when elbows collided and limbs tangled. It wasn't the smooth seduction of movies. It was real and messy and absolutely beautiful. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Carolyn's head on Dominic's chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I like you," he said into the darkness. "I know it's fast. I know it's crazy. But I love you, Carolyn. I love you too." She pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. God help us both. The return the flight back to New York felt too short. They sat close, hands intertwined, stealing kisses when the flight attendant wasn't looking. But as the Manhattan skyline came into view, reality crashed down on them. "They're not going to understand," Caroline said quietly. "I don't care." Dominic squeezed her hand. "Let them think what they want. We know the truth." But at Dominic's penthouse, the truth didn't seem to matter. His father was waiting, along with Caroline's mother and a lawyer she didn't recognize. "We need to talk," James Ashford said without preamble. "All of us." In the formal living room, surrounded by expensive furniture and family photos that felt like accusations, the truth came out. The marriage had served its purpose. The Matthews Pharmaceutical Company had received its injection of capital. Ashford Technologies had gained access to valuable patents. The merger was complete. "So you can divorce quietly," Patricia Matthews said, her voice brisk and businesslike. "We'll spin it as an amicable split. No one needs to know the real arrangement." Dominic's voice was steel. "We're not divorcing." James Ashford's eyes narrowed. "Don't be foolish. You've done your duty. Now you can both move on with your lives." "We are moving on," Carolyn interjected, finding her voice. "Together." "You're confusing obligation with affection," her mother said dismissively. "It's natural after spending time in close quarters. But it will pass." "It's not passing." Dominic stood, pulling Caroline up beside him. "It's growing. I love your daughter. And I'm not going to divorce her to make your corporate maneuvering tidier." The ex-girlfriendly confrontation was interrupted by the doorman buzzing up. "Miss Natasha Bennett is here to see you, Mr. Ashford." "Who's Natasha Bennett?" The look on Dominic's face told her everything. "My ex. What is she doing here?" Natasha Bennett swept into the penthouse like she owned it. Tall, blonde, impossibly elegant in a designer suit that probably cost more than Caroline's wedding dress. Her smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Dominic, darling." She air-kissed both his cheeks while Carolyn fought the urge to physically remove her. "I heard you were back from your little honeymoon." "Congratulations, I suppose. Natasha, what do you want?" "Just to check on you." Her eyes flicked to Caroline, dismissive. "Make sure you haven't done anything too hasty. We both know this marriage was just a business arrangement. Now that it's served its purpose, you're free." "Free to what?" "Come back to you." Dominic's voice was cold. "We broke up over a year ago. You made it very clear you weren't interested in anything serious. I made a mistake." Natasha's hand landed on his arm, possessive. "I realize that now. We were good together, Dominic. We understood each other. We're from the same world." Again that dismissive glance at Caroline. "Not like some people who married for money." Caroline felt rage ignite in her chest. Before she could stop herself, she stepped between Natasha and Dominic. "I didn't marry him for money. And he didn't marry me out of obligation. We fell in love. How sweet." Natasha's laugh was crystalline and cruel. "Love. What a quaint notion." "Dominic, surely you're not buying this." "I'm buying every word." Dominic wrapped his arm around Caroline's waist, pulling her against him. "Because it's true. I love her, Natasha. In a way, I never loved you. In a way, I didn't think I was capable of loving anyone. You'll regret this. Natasha's composure cracked. She's not one of us. She'll never fit into your world. Then maybe I'll fit into hers instead. Dominic looked at Caroline, and the love in his eyes made her want to cry. Maybe I've been in the wrong world all along, fighting for forever after. Natasha left in a fury, and their parents retreated to regroup. Caroline and Dominic stood alone in the penthouse that no longer felt cold. It felt like possibility. Your father is going to make this difficult, Caroline said. Let him try. Dominic pulled her close. I spent my whole life doing what he wanted. Not anymore. Not when it comes to you. My mother will cut me off. Disown me, probably. You don't need her money. You have your art, and you have me. He kissed her forehead. We'll figure it out together. Over the next few weeks, they did exactly that. Dominic began transitioning his role at Ashford Technologies, promoting competent executives and stepping back from day-to-day operations. Caroline started painting again, really painting, and discovered galleries interested in her work. Not because of her name or connections, but because her art was good. Raw and honest and powerful. They found a smaller apartment in Brooklyn, away from Manhattan's oppressive expectations. It had hardwood floors and high ceilings, perfect for Caroline's studio. It had a rooftop where they could watch sunsets and remember Santorini. It felt like home. James Ashford eventually came around, especially when he realized his son was happier than he had ever seen him. Patricia Matthews took longer, but when she saw Caroline's first gallery show, tears streaming down her face as she looked at paintings that showed all the emotion her daughter had suppressed for years. Something in her finally cracked. I'm sorry, she whispered to Caroline at the opening. I'm so sorry for not seeing who you really were. It wasn't everything. Forgiveness would take time, but it was a start. Epilogue. 1 year later, Caroline stood in front of her easel in their Brooklyn apartment, painting as afternoon light streamed through the windows. Behind her, she heard Dominic come in from his run, the familiar sound of his keys hitting the bowl by the door. His footsteps crossing the floor. Beautiful. His arms wrapped around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. How's it going? Good. This one might be ready for the show next month. The painting showed two figures dancing together, surrounded by swirls of color that represented both chaos and joy. Separate, but connected. Different, but complementary. It's perfect. He kissed her neck. Like you, charmer. But she leaned back against him, comfortable in a way she never thought possible. I have news, Dominic said, and something in his voice made her turn to face him. The board approved my proposal. I'm opening a foundation to help young people pursue creative careers their families don't support. Art, music, architecture, whatever passion they have. We're calling it the Matthews Ashford Foundation. Caroline felt tears sting her eyes. Dominic, that's incredible. It's because of you. He cupped her face in his hands. You showed me that passion matters, that dreams matter, that sometimes the things our families call impractical are the only things worth living for. I love you, she said, for the 1000th time. And it never got old. I love you more. Kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. Thank you for teaching me what that really means. Outside, the Brooklyn streets hummed with life. Inside, in their small apartment filled with paintings and laughter and love, Caroline and Dominic had found something more valuable than any corporate merger. They had found each other and chosen each other, and built something real from the ashes of an arranged marriage. It hadn't started as a love story, but it had become one anyway, written in sunset colors and whispered confessions, in shared laughter and tender kisses, in the daily choice to keep choosing each other, and that, Caroline thought as she kissed her husband back, was the best ending she could have ever painted.